Welcome back to a journey through time. Today, we're going to explore something so intimate, so universal, and yet so deeply personal that we rarely think to examine it. We're going to talk about sleep. For as long as humans have existed, we have closed our eyes at the end of the day. We have sought refuge in rest. And yet, the way we sleep, the rituals surrounding it, the very architecture of sleep itself has changed so profoundly across the centuries that the sleep of an ancient Egyptian would be almost unrecognizable to us today. Most of us think of sleep as something simple. We get tired, we go to bed, we close our eyes and wake up refreshed. But the history of sleep is far more complicated, far more interesting, and far more revealing about how humans have lived than we might expect. So today, settle in, get comfortable. We're going to move slowly through the centuries, examining not just how people slept, but why they slept the way they did, what their bedrooms looked like, what they wore, what they thought about as they drifted off, and what their dreams meant to them. This is the history of sleep, and it begins, as all stories do, at the very beginning, the sleep of the ancient world. Let us begin, if we will, in ancient Egypt, around 3000 BCE. The sun has set over the Nile, the city of Memphis grows quiet, and in the homes of ordinary Egyptians, the preparation for sleep begins. The ancient Egyptians had a complex relationship with sleep. For them, sleep was not simply rest. Sleep was a state that resembled death. It was a vulnerable time, and they approached it with caution and ritual. In the homes of the wealthy, sleep took place on raised beds. These beds were not like ours. They were simple wooden frames, sometimes strung with rope or leather strips to create a surface. The wood often came from imported cedar, a luxury reserved for those with means. The legs of these beds were often carved to resemble animal forms, lions, bulls, or other creatures meant to guard the sleeper through the night. But most Egyptians, the farmers, the laborers, the artisans, they did not have such elaborate beds. They slept on simple mats woven from palm fronds and reeds. These mats would be rolled up during the day and unrolled at night. Some families shared sleeping spaces, parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives all in the same room, huddled together for warmth and protection. The Egyptians did not sleep in complete darkness as we might imagine. A small lamp, a shallow dish filled with oil with a rush or papyrus wick, would often be left burning through the night. This served multiple purposes. It provided minimal light, so one could navigate if needed. It kept some warmth in the room, and importantly, it provided a sense of security. The darkness was not total. The night was not complete. What did Egyptians wear to sleep? The answer is very little. In a hot climate like Egypt's, loose linen garments were all that was needed, if anything at all. We know from paintings and hieroglyphics that both men and women would loosen their clothing at night, sometimes removing it entirely. The goal was comfort and the management of heat. Before sleep, the rituals were important. The Egyptians would wash their hands and face with water, a form of purification before entering the sleep state. They might use scented oils made from myrrh, frankincense, or other fragrant plants. These were not simply luxuries. Scent was believed to have protective and spiritual properties. The smell of these oils would linger in the air as one fell asleep. And what of their pillows? Here we find something quite surprising. The ancient Egyptians did not use soft pillows filled with down or cotton. Instead, they used headrests, hard, curved objects, usually made of stone, wood, or ivory. These headrests would support the head at the back of the neck, elevating it slightly. They seem uncomfortable to us now, but consider, in a hot climate, a pillow that absorbed heat and moisture from the head would be unpleasant. A hard, cool headrest would be more refreshing. It would also help to protect the elaborate hairstyles and wigs that Egyptians wore during the day. The sleeping positions of the Egyptians were documented in their tomb paintings. They often slept on their sides, with one arm extended and the other bent. This position is efficient for breathing and for managing body heat. It is a position we might recognize in our own sleep patterns today. Sleep in ancient Egypt was also the time when dreams occurred, and dreams were taken very seriously. The Egyptians believed that dreams were messages from the gods, glimpses into other worlds, warnings of things to come. There were dream interpreters in Egyptian society, much as there would be later. A dream of flooding waters might mean prosperity was coming. A dream of falling might warn of danger ahead. When a person in ancient Egypt fell ill in the night or woke with fear, there were rituals to protect them. They might recite spells or prayers. They might touch protective amulets worn around the neck or placed near the bed. They might call out to wake others in the household, because solitude in the darkness was frightening. Sleep was safe. Waking in the darkness was not. Now, let us move forward in time. Let us travel to ancient Greece, around the same period, or perhaps a few centuries later. The relationship with sleep here was somewhat different. The ancient Greeks saw sleep as necessary but somewhat suspicious. The philosopher Aristotle would later write extensively about sleep, trying to understand its nature and purpose. Was it a death-like state? Was it necessary for health? Why did we lose consciousness? In the homes of ancient Greeks, the sleeping arrangements were quite different from those in Egypt. In a typical Greek home, the primary sleeping room was called the thalamos. This was usually the innermost room of the house, furthest from the entrance. This arrangement was deliberate. It provided privacy and security. Greek beds, called klein, were wooden frames with a woven mesh of straps or rope. Unlike Egyptian beds, they were often lower to the ground. The Greeks might use a mattress, a filled sack of wool or straw, or simply the rope base itself. Pillows were small and often made of feathers or down. Blankets were made of wool or linen, depending on the season and the family's means. What strikes us now is the communal nature of Greek sleep. In many households, family members would sleep in the same room. Servants might sleep in the same space as their employers, or in adjoining rooms. Privacy was not a value as we understand it today. The presence of others provided security and warmth. The Greeks, too, had sleep rituals. Before bed, one might drink a mixture of wine and herbs, perhaps chamomile or the ancient equivalent. These herbal drinks were believed to promote sleep and pleasant dreams. The practice would persist for millennia, continuing into the Middle Ages and beyond. Night clothes in ancient Greece were minimal, often just a simple chiton, a draped garment, loosely worn. As with the Egyptians, the goal was comfort without overheating. And what of the Greek relationship with sleep itself? There was a certain ambivalence. Sleep was necessary, yes, but there was a sense that sleep was also a loss of time, a surrender of consciousness. The ideal was to be awake, alert, and active. To sleep for long hours was seen as lazy or excessive. Many Greeks, particularly those of the upper classes, would pride themselves on needing very little sleep. This value, the glorification of wakefulness, would appear again and again in various cultures throughout history. As we move into the Roman period, we find sleep becoming more regimented, more organized by the structures of society. The structured sleep of Rome. In ancient Rome, around the 1st century CE, the concept of sleep had become more systematic, more tied to the daily rhythms of urban life and social hierarchy. Rome was a city of millions. It was crowded, noisy, and bustling with activity from dawn to dusk. Sleep in Rome, then, was precious, and it was often interrupted. In the homes of wealthy Romans, the sleeping arrangements were more elaborate. A prosperous Roman household might have a dedicated bedroom called the cubiculum. This room might contain a bed, the lectus, which was a true luxury item. The lectus was often highly decorated, with carved wooden frames, sometimes inlaid with precious materials. Mattresses were filled with wool, feathers, or straw. Blankets and coverlets were made of fine fabrics. But here's what's important to understand. Even in wealthy households, sleep was not always a private affair. The Romans practiced what we might call social sleep. Important guests might be invited to sleep in the host's home. Multiple family members would sleep in the same room. Servants would sleep nearby, ready to answer a call in the night. For ordinary Romans, and Rome had millions of them, sleep was quite different. The vast majority of Romans lived in apartment buildings called insulae. These were crowded, often poorly constructed buildings, multiple stories high, packed with families living in single rooms or small clusters of rooms. In such conditions, sleep was communal out of necessity. Several family members would share a single room. Beds were simple, perhaps just a wooden frame with a straw mattress. The noise from other residents, from the street below, from animals on the lower floors, would be constant. Sleep in an insula was not a quiet, peaceful affair. It was interrupted and often difficult to achieve. The Romans, like the Greeks, often took a midday nap called the siesta. This was not laziness. It was a practical response to the heat. In the afternoon, many would retreat to their homes, eat a light meal, and rest for an hour or two. Then, refreshed, they would return to their activities until evening. The main sleep period would begin in the early evening, around the time of darkness. Romans would retire when the sun set and might wake several times during the night. This fragmented sleep pattern was common. They might lie awake between sleep periods, rise to attend to tasks, or visit a neighbor. The concept of an uninterrupted 8-hour sleep was not part of the Roman experience. Night clothes for Romans were minimal. Most would sleep in simple tunics, or sometimes completely nude. The wealthy might have more elaborate sleepwear, but the general practice was simplicity. Interestingly, the Romans had strong views about what to do before sleep to ensure a good night. They believed that eating certain foods might bring bad dreams. A heavy meal before bed was considered dangerous. It might cause nightmares or restless sleep. Instead, they might eat bread with honey or drink milk. Wine was also used, often mixed with herbs or warm water. The Romans also valued physical comfort. A good pillow was important. Pillows were usually small, often filled with feathers or wool. But some Romans, in their practicality, would use hard pillows similar to the Egyptian headrests. The idea was that a hard surface would help align the head and neck properly. Temperature control was a concern. In winter, rooms would be cold. Romans did not have central heating, though the wealthy might have hypocausts, a system of heated air flowing under the floor. Most people simply endured the cold, huddling under blankets and relying on body heat from other family members sharing the space. One aspect of Roman sleep that we have good records of is the Roman fear of bad dreams. The Romans believed that dreams were omens, messages from the gods, or intrusions from other realms. A nightmare might be taken as a serious warning. After a particularly bad dream, a Roman might consult a dream interpreter or seek advice on how to prevent such dreams in the future. There were even specialists in Rome who sold dream interpretations. The most famous was a man named Artemidorus, who compiled a detailed book of dream meanings. If you dreamed of flying, it meant you would travel. If you dreamed of teeth falling out, it meant something would be lost. If you dreamed of water, it could mean many things depending on the context: danger, fertility, transformation, or purification. These interpretations would be read carefully by those seeking to understand what their sleep had revealed. The Romans also had a strong belief in the evil eye and other supernatural dangers. Before sleep, they might engage in protective rituals. A charm or amulet might be placed near the bed. Protective words might be spoken. The night was understood to be a time when malevolent forces were more active, when one was more vulnerable. We now step into the Middle Ages, a period spanning roughly 1,000 years of European history. It is here that the concept of sleep changed in profound ways, shaped by religion, superstition, social structures, and the very architecture of medieval homes. The medieval period was deeply religious. The Christian church dominated not just spiritual life, but the organization of time itself. The day was divided into prayer times: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. This structure affected sleep profoundly. For monks and nuns, sleep was literally interrupted. A bell would ring in the middle of the night, calling them to rise for the service of matins. They would stumble from their beds, half asleep, and make their way to the church for prayer. This was not optional. This was the rhythm of religious life. So the sleep of monks and nuns was fragmented by design. They would sleep for a few hours, wake for prayers, sleep again, wake for more prayers. Sleep was a series of episodes, punctuated by religious obligations. For ordinary people, sleep was also structured, but differently. The night was divided into two main sleep periods, separated by what we might call a waking interval. This was sometimes called first sleep and second sleep, or early sleep and late sleep. A person might go to bed at dusk, sleep for a few hours, then wake. This waking period might last for an hour or more. During this time, a person might sit by the fire if they had one. They might do some light household tasks. They might pray. If they were married, they might visit their spouse. Some would use this time to visit neighbors. Then, as drowsiness returned, they would go back to bed for the second sleep, which would last until dawn. This pattern of biphasic sleep was so common that it was reflected in literature and records of the time. People spoke of it as a natural part of life. It was not considered an affliction or a sign of poor sleep. It was simply how sleep worked. Medieval homes were very different from what we might expect. The vast majority of medieval people lived in small, single-room or two-room houses. The home would be small, with a thatched roof and perhaps a wooden frame. There would be minimal furniture. A bed might be a simple wooden frame with straw, or just a pile of straw on the floor with a blanket over it. For warmth, the entire family would sleep together in the same bed. A medieval peasant family, parents and children, might all share a single bed. Body heat was essential for survival in the cold winter months. In such conditions, privacy and modesty, as we understand them, were simply not possible. Sleep was a communal, family affair. Interestingly, medieval sources make it clear that children were considered part of this sleeping arrangement. A child might sleep between the parents. Infants might sleep in a small cradle nearby. This was not seen as unusual or inappropriate. It was simply the way families slept. In wealthier medieval households, the sleeping arrangements were more elaborate, but still quite different from what we might expect. A noble family might have a great chamber where the lord and lady slept, but servants and other family members might also sleep in this room. Complete privacy was rare even for the wealthy. Medieval sleep was deeply influenced by fear. The night was understood to be a dangerous time, a time when evil spirits were more active, when bad things were more likely to happen. Windows were small and often covered to keep out malevolent spirits. Doors were barred at night. Before sleep, people would make the sign of the cross. They would pray. They would invoke protective saints. In medieval belief, the night was the domain of supernatural creatures. Demons might try to enter a sleeping person's body. Witches might visit in spirit form. The devil was more active at night. So sleep, while necessary, was also a vulnerable state, a time when one's soul might be in danger. To protect themselves, people employed various strategies. A crucifix or religious image might be placed above the bed. Holy water might be kept nearby. Some would keep salt or iron, both believed to have protective properties, near the bed. The idea was to create a sacred space that demons and evil spirits could not penetrate. Night clothes in the medieval period were simple. Most people would wear a simple linen shift or tunic, or sleep naked. The wealthy might wear more elaborate nightgowns, often simple long garments made of fine linen. But the function was the same, to allow for some modesty if needed, while still allowing movement and comfort. What about pillows and bedding? In medieval homes, pillows were often filled with straw, wool, or feathers if available. But many poor people might have no pillow at all, simply resting their head on folded clothing or directly on the straw mattress. Blankets and coverlets were precious items. A family might have 1 or 2 blankets, made of coarse wool or linen. Sleep in the medieval period was also tied to the seasons in a way that we can barely imagine now. In winter, days were short and nights were long. People might sleep much longer in winter, 12 or more hours of sleep spread across the night. In summer, with long daylight hours, sleep might be much shorter. The medieval concept of dreams was interesting and complex. Dreams could be divine messages, God speaking to someone in their sleep. Saint Augustine and other church fathers wrote extensively about this. A dream might be a spiritual visitation, a message about the future, a warning from God, or a temptation from the devil. Dreams were also subject to interpretation. A medieval person waking from a vivid dream might consult a priest or a knowledgeable person to understand what the dream meant. Some dreams were thought to be visions, spiritual experiences granted to the sleeping person. Others were thought to be intrusions from demonic forces or the natural result of indigestion. The medieval period also saw the development of certain sleep-related illnesses and concerns. There was a condition called nightmares, not the dreams themselves, but a literal creature believed to sit on a sleeping person's chest, causing the terrifying dreams. The creature, a demonic being or perhaps a shape-shifting witch, would paralyze the sleeper and create nightmares. This condition, what we now understand to be sleep paralysis with accompanying hallucinations, was terrifying to medieval people. They would do everything they could to prevent the nightmare from visiting them. Medieval monks and scholars also wrote about sleep in the context of health and medicine. The balance of the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was thought to affect sleep. Too much of one humor might cause insomnia or excessive sleepiness. A physician might be consulted about sleep problems. He might recommend certain herbs, or certain foods, or bloodletting to restore the proper balance. There were also medieval remedies for sleeplessness. One might be given poppy seeds or opium. One might be advised to eat certain foods like barley bread or milk. One might be told to take a warm bath or to apply warm oils to the temples. Some of these remedies had actual efficacy. Others were purely psychological, but all were part of the medieval understanding of how to promote good sleep. The medieval period also saw the development of certain bedtime rituals that would persist for centuries. Before sleep, a person might remove their outer clothes and dress in simpler garments. They might wash their face and hands, a form of purification. They might eat a light meal. They might pray. In monasteries, there were specific rituals before sleep, including the reading of sacred texts and the singing of hymns. One thing that strikes us now is how integrated sleep was into the medieval day. It was not a separate activity set apart from daily life. It was woven into the fabric of the day, a natural part of the rhythm of existence. People slept when it was dark, woke when it was light, and adapted their sleep to the seasons and to the demands of their lives. As we move toward the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the Renaissance, sleep practices began to change. The invention of better artificial lighting, the development of new technologies, and changing social structures would all affect how people slept. As we enter the Renaissance and the early modern period, roughly from 1500 to 1800, we see sleep beginning to transform. The world is changing, technology is advancing, social structures are shifting, and with them, the experience of sleep is changing too. One major development is the increasing availability of artificial lighting. Candles become more common and more affordable. Oil lamps become more refined. This means that evening does not have to end when the sun sets. Life can continue into the darkness. Work can continue. Social activity can continue. This has a profound effect on sleep. In medieval times, sleep essentially began at sunset, or shortly after. The darkness made all other activities difficult or impossible, so sleep was almost inevitable when darkness came. But as lighting improves, sleep is delayed. People can read, work, socialize, or conduct business well into the evening. Sleep becomes something that happens later, after these other activities are completed. In the homes of wealthy people in the early modern period, we see changes in architecture and furniture. Beds become more elaborate. They become status symbols. A fine bed with carved wooden posts and expensive fabrics indicates wealth and power. These beds are often very high, requiring steps to climb into them. They are often enclosed with curtains or drapes, creating a private sleeping chamber within a room. These enclosed beds served multiple purposes. The curtains provided warmth. They helped trap heat inside the bed. They also provided privacy, or at least the appearance of privacy. Someone could change clothes or sleep more privately behind the curtains, and they kept out cold drafts and potentially harmful air. Medieval medicine believed that night air was corrupted and could cause illness. Enclosed beds were thought to protect against this miasma. Bedding becomes more elaborate for the wealthy. Multiple blankets, sheets of fine linen, pillows filled with goose down, coverlets made of expensive fabrics, all of these are signs of wealth. An ordinary person might have a straw mattress and a single wool blanket. A wealthy person might have several layers of linens, multiple pillows, and beautiful coverlets. But what's interesting is that even with these improvements, the sleeping habits of the wealthy remained quite similar to the medieval period. They still experienced fragmented sleep. They still woke in the middle of the night. They still had a first sleep and a second sleep. This suggests that fragmented sleep was not a failure of their sleep environment, but rather a natural pattern that humans returned to when they didn't have to maintain a rigid schedule. For ordinary people, sleep conditions improved gradually. Better housing became more common. A peasant cottage might have a small window now, or better insulation. Beds might be raised off the ground on simple frames rather than just piles of straw on the floor. Blankets might be made of better material. Life was improving, slowly, for most people. But the cities were growing, and in growing cities, sleep was often difficult. Urban living meant crowded conditions. Multiple families might live in a single small house or apartment. Noise from the streets would be constant. Animals, roosters, chickens, pigs, would make their sounds at night. Sleep in the city was often broken and unsatisfying. Let's look at a specific example: London in the 1600s. A typical working-class family, a printer's apprentice for instance, might live in a small room in a crowded building. The room would be shared with other apprentices, perhaps 3 or 4 sleeping in the same bed or on pallets on the floor. Below, in the workshop, early morning activities would begin before dawn. The noise would wake everyone. Sleep would be cut short. This is the beginning of what we might call the tyranny of the night schedule. As technology allows humans to extend their waking hours into the darkness, the amount of time available for sleep actually decreases. People who once slept 10 or 12 hours a night now sleep perhaps 7 or 8, because there are now so many things to do after dark. In the 1700s, especially in France and England, we see further changes. The Enlightenment brings new ideas about health, science, and the body. Sleep begins to be understood differently, not just as rest, but as essential to health and functioning. Physicians begin to write about sleep more systematically. Bedtime rituals begin to change. Rather than prayer before sleep, we see more emphasis on physical comfort and hygienic practices. A person might take a bath or wash before bed. They might drink a warm beverage, milk perhaps, or warm wine with herbs. The aim is not spiritual protection, but physical comfort. Sleeping positions begin to be discussed in medical texts. Physicians recommend sleeping on one side rather than the other. Some recommend sleeping with the head elevated. Others recommend a specific orientation, sleeping with the head to the north or east, or with the window direction in mind. Night clothes in the early modern period become more developed. In wealthy households, both men and women might have elaborate nightgowns or sleeping robes. These are often made of fine fabrics and might be quite costly. They're sleepwear in the modern sense, garments designed specifically for sleeping. For ordinary people, night clothes remain simple. Perhaps a linen shift for women, or a simple tunic for men. But as the period progresses and manufacturing improves, more people have garments specifically for sleep, rather than simply sleeping in their day clothes. The concept of the bedroom also begins to change. In earlier periods, the bedroom was simply a room where sleeping happened. But in the early modern period, especially as wealth increases, the bedroom becomes a more specialized space. It might be decorated. It might be heated. It might be furnished with dressing tables and chairs. The bedroom is becoming a private retreat, not just a place where the body rests. But this is happening mainly for the wealthy. For the vast majority of people, sleep still happens in crowded, noisy, cold or hot conditions, shared with family members or others, in simple rooms with minimal furnishings. The transformation of sleep for the wealthy is creating an increasingly stark contrast between how the rich sleep and how the poor sleep. Dreams in the early modern period are still taken seriously, but there's less emphasis on the supernatural and more on the psychological or medical. Dreams are thought to be related to the digestion of food, to the balance of humors, to the state of mind. A person's dreams might reveal something about their health or their emotional state. There's also developing a market for dream interpretation books, guides that explain what different dreams mean. These are often sold alongside medical texts and practical guides. The idea that dreams can be read like a text, that they contain messages, remains powerful even as the understanding of what those messages mean is changing. One more thing of note. In this period, we see the beginning of the association between sleep and the bed. Earlier, people would sleep anywhere, on the ground, on a bench, in whatever space was available. But increasingly, sleep happens in a bed, in a room designed for sleeping. The bed becomes the place where sleep occurs. This might seem obvious to us, but it's a relatively recent development in human history. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the late 1700s and accelerating through the 1800s, transforms human life in ways both visible and subtle. One of the most profound transformations concerns sleep. The invention of the gas lamp in the early 1800s and then the electric light in the late 1800s fundamentally changes the relationship between humans and darkness. For the first time in human history, night is no longer necessarily dark. If you have the money, you can light your home at night almost as brightly as day. This has consequences that ripple through society. If night can be as bright as day, then day and night are no longer opposed. The natural rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, based on the sun, begins to fragment. Cities lit by gas lamps appear in 1800s London, Paris, and other major cities. These cities now have nightlife in a way they never did before. Theaters, restaurants, clubs, and public spaces remain open and active well into the night. The night becomes a time for entertainment and socialization, not just sleep. This has profound effects on sleep. People now stay up much later. Rather than going to sleep at dusk or early evening, people in the city might stay awake until 10 or 11 at night, engaged in entertainment or work. Sleep shifts later in the evening, and because people need to wake early to go to work, the total amount of sleep begins to decrease. The Industrial Revolution also brings changes to work itself. Factory work is scheduled work, often running long hours. A factory worker might work 12, 14, or even 16 hours a day. Such hours leave little time for sleep. The amount of sleep decreases further. In homes, technology begins to change sleep's infrastructure. Better heating becomes available for the wealthy. Central heating systems are developed. Beds become more standardized and manufactured rather than custom-made. Bedding becomes mass-produced and more affordable. The bedroom, as a concept, becomes more developed. It becomes a private space, separated from the rest of the home. In Victorian homes, the bedroom is a distinct room, often quite separate from living areas. The bed itself becomes a piece of furniture that's carefully chosen and displayed. But working-class people in the industrial cities still sleep in crowded conditions. Tenements in cities like London, New York, and Manchester house multiple families in small spaces. Sleep is still crowded, noisy, and often inadequate. Interestingly, this is the period when the concept of first sleep and second sleep begins to disappear from records. The fragmented sleep pattern that had been normal for centuries seems to fade away, replaced by the expectation of a single, continuous night's sleep. This is puzzling to historians. Did people stop experiencing this pattern, or did the definition of normal sleep change? One theory is that as artificial lighting allows for more evening activity, and as work schedules become more rigid, people can no longer afford to be awake in the middle of the night. Their schedule doesn't allow for a waking interval, so they try to compress their sleep into a single block. Whether this is comfortable or healthy is another question. But the pattern becomes normalized. One continuous 8-hour sleep is now the ideal. By the late 1800s, sleep science begins to emerge. Researchers start studying sleep using scientific methods. They measure brain waves, they study the effects of sleep deprivation, they investigate the stages of sleep. Sleep is becoming something to be studied and understood, not just experienced. There's a growing concern about sleep, particularly about insomnia. Victorian and Edwardian societies begin to see sleeplessness as a disease, a problem to be solved. Physicians prescribe various remedies. Bromide salts become popular. Later, barbiturates are introduced. For the first time, there are pharmaceutical interventions for sleep problems. Night clothes in the 1800s become more elaborate and gendered. Nightgowns for women become beautiful, often quite elaborate, with lace and embroidery. They're designed not just for comfort, but for appearance. Men's nightshirts become standard as well. The idea of proper sleepwear, garments designed specifically for sleep and worn only at night, becomes established. In wealthier households, the bedroom becomes more decorative and comfortable. Carpets on the floor, wallpapered walls, carefully chosen furniture. The bedroom is no longer just a place to sleep, but a private retreat, an expression of taste and status. The mattress undergoes changes as well. The coil spring mattress is invented, making beds more comfortable and longer lasting. Inner spring mattresses become standard by the early 1900s. Pillows are filled with better materials, providing more consistent support. As we move into the early 1900s, there's an increasing emphasis on sleep hygiene, the idea that sleep quality can be improved through proper practices. Physicians recommend a cool room, a firm mattress, clean bedding, comfortable sleepwear, and a regular schedule. These recommendations would sound quite modern to us now. Advertising begins to play a role in shaping ideas about sleep. Companies advertise mattresses, pillows, bedding, and sleep aids. They create desires for better sleep comfort. The messaging is sophisticated. These products don't just provide comfort, but health, beauty, and success. A person who sleeps well is more attractive. more productive, more successful. There's also a growing anxiety about not getting enough sleep. Insomnia becomes something people worry about. The fast pace of modern life is blamed for sleep problems. The constant stimulation of the modern world, electricity, noise, excitement, is seen as interfering with the body's natural desire for rest. Sleep becomes something to be conquered, controlled, optimized. It's no longer just something that happens, it's something to be managed. As the 20th century unfolds, sleep experiences profound changes. The century begins with the growing availability of electric lighting, continues with the invention of radio and television, and ends with the internet and smartphones. Each technology affects how and when people sleep. By the 1920s and 1930s, electric lighting is becoming common in developed countries. More people than ever before have access to artificial light that extends the day far into the evening. The concept of going to bed at dusk is almost entirely gone for urban dwellers. Electricity also brings the radio, a form of entertainment available in the evening in your own home. People could listen to radio programs, music, comedy, or news late into the evening. Sleep gets pushed later. People go to bed at 10, 11, or even midnight. The mid-20th century brings television. This is transformative. For the first time, visual entertainment is available in the home, on demand, at any time. A person could watch programs until late evening, staying stimulated and engaged right up until bedtime. The idea of winding down before sleep becomes more difficult. In the 1950s and 1960s, sleeping pills become widely available. Barbiturates, which had been used earlier, are joined by new classes of drugs like benzodiazepines. These are prescribed for insomnia, anxiety, and other sleep problems. The pharmaceutical management of sleep becomes normal. If you can't sleep naturally, you take a pill. The bedroom itself continues to evolve. By the mid-20th century, in developed countries, the bedroom is typically a private space, reserved for sleep and intimate activity. Children have their own bedrooms, if the family has enough space. Adults have privacy. This is a remarkable change from earlier centuries, when sleeping spaces were shared. But the quality of sleep is not necessarily better. In fact, studies begin to show that modern people are sleeping less than previous generations. The average amount of sleep has decreased significantly. Where a person in 1900 might have slept 8 or 9 hours, a person in 1950 might sleep only 7 hours, and by 2000, many people are sleeping 6 hours or even less. This decrease in sleep is attributed to various factors: electric lighting extending the day, more work and stress, more entertainment options, busier schedules, more noise and light pollution. The world is becoming faster, more stimulating, more demanding. Sleep suffers. The study of sleep becomes more sophisticated. In the 1950s, scientists discover REM sleep, the stage where dreams occur. They begin to understand that sleep has stages, that sleep is not a uniform state, but a complex, dynamic process with different phases. In the 1960s and 1970s, sleep research becomes more rigorous. Scientists measure brain waves during sleep. They study the effects of sleep deprivation. They investigate what happens if someone is deprived of REM sleep versus other sleep stages. Sleep is revealed to be far more complex than previously understood. There's growing concern about sleep problems. Insomnia is increasingly common. Physicians are puzzled. Why, with all our modern comforts, better beds, better heating, electricity, comfort, are people sleeping worse, not better? The answer begins to emerge. The modern world itself is incompatible with good sleep. The constant stimulation, the constant light, the constant demands on attention and time, all work against natural sleep. We've created an environment that's fundamentally hostile to rest. The bedroom in the later 20th century begins to acquire competing purposes. Where it was previously just for sleep, it now might also be for television watching. By the 1970s and 1980s, it's common to have a television in the bedroom. This means that sleep and entertainment are mixed together in the same space. Bedding and mattresses continue to improve. By the late 20th century, there are elaborate mattress systems with different firmness levels, different layers, designed for different purposes. Pillows are designed with specific support. Sheets might be made of specialized fabrics designed to regulate temperature. Sleep has become a consumer category with lots of products. But despite these improvements, people report sleeping worse. Sleep problems increase. The number of people taking sleeping pills increases. The desire to sleep more, to rest more, becomes something people express frequently. The late 20th century also sees an interesting paradox. Even as sleep products improve and become more available, sleep itself is increasingly viewed as a luxury, something people struggle to get enough of. Success is increasingly associated with working hard, staying up late, getting up early. There's a cultural valorization of exhaustion, of pushing through tiredness. The person who can function on 5 hours of sleep is seen as tough, dedicated, successful. This is remarkably different from earlier periods when sleep was viewed as necessary and natural, if somewhat suspicious. Now sleep is something you might feel guilty about. Sleeping too much is lazy. Sleeping enough is a luxury. Sleep is in tension with productivity and success. The bedroom becomes, in many cases, a kind of refuge from the demanding world outside. It's the one place where one might have privacy and control. But even here, by the end of the century, technology is invading. Computers, internet access, mobile phones, all begin to appear in bedrooms. Sleep also becomes increasingly class-based. Wealthy people can afford better mattresses, better bedding, better bedrooms, sometimes even vacation time specifically for rest. Poor people might be sleeping on cheap mattresses, in noisy conditions, with multiple jobs or stressful circumstances that prevent good sleep. By the end of the 20th century, the transformation is complete. Sleep has gone from being a simple, natural, integrated part of daily life to being a complex, problematic, consumer-driven concern. We have better tools for sleeping, but we sleep worse. We have more privacy, but more pressure. We have more information about sleep, but less peace. As we enter the 21st century, sleep faces a new challenge: the digital revolution. The smartphone, developed in the early 2000s, becomes ubiquitous by the 2010s. This device is simultaneously a necessity for modern life and a profound enemy of good sleep. The smartphone is different from television or radio. It's personal. It's with you. It goes into the bedroom. It goes to bed with you. Many people sleep with their phone right beside them, or even in hand. The screen of a smartphone emits blue light, which affects the brain's production of melatonin, the hormone that triggers sleepiness. Using a phone in the evening can delay the onset of sleep by an hour or more. But beyond the physical effects, the psychological effect is even more profound. The phone creates a sense of connection and stimulation that's antithetical to the quiet, restful state needed for sleep. People check their phones before bed. They check emails, social media, news. They're engaging their minds right up until they try to sleep. The mind stays active, alert, agitated. Then they lie in bed, still thinking about messages they read, wanting to check their phone for responses. Sleep becomes elusive. Studies in the early 2000s and 2010s show that screen time before bed is associated with poor sleep quality and shorter sleep duration. Yet the practice becomes increasingly common. Many people report that they can't fall asleep without checking their phone first. The phone has become part of the sleep ritual itself, but in a way that undermines sleep. The bedroom, which had become a refuge, is now invaded by the digital world. Your work emails can reach you in bed. Messages from friends can ping on your phone. News alerts can wake you in the middle of the night. The boundary between the working, connected world and the resting, private world has collapsed. There's also a new phenomenon: sleep tracking. Devices that track heart rate, movement, and other biometric data during sleep become popular. People wear fitness trackers to bed. They have apps that monitor their sleep. There's data about their sleep that they can review. This creates a kind of surveillance of sleep. You're not just sleeping, you're being monitored while you sleep. This has a psychological effect. Some people become anxious about their sleep data. If the app says they slept poorly, they become worried. They obsess about sleep quality rather than just sleeping naturally. The monitoring itself can interfere with sleep. By the 2010s and 2020s, there's growing awareness of the sleep crisis. Studies show that people, especially in developed countries, are sleeping less than ever. The average sleep duration has dropped to 6.5 hours or even less. There's widespread sleep deprivation. Exhaustion is common. The bedroom itself continues to evolve. Some people create elaborate sleep environments: blackout curtains, white noise machines, air purifiers, humidifiers, expensive mattresses. There's a whole industry devoted to improving sleep environment. Yet despite these investments, many people still sleep poorly. Paradoxically, there's also a growing wellness movement focused on sleep. Mindfulness meditation, meditation apps, aromatherapy, herbal sleep aids, all of these become popular as people seek ways to improve their sleep. Sleep becomes a health concern that people are actively working on. there's also a new awareness of sleep deprivation as a health issue. Research shows links between inadequate sleep and obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cognitive decline, and mental health problems. Sleep is no longer seen as just a luxury or an indulgence. It's essential for health. Yet getting sufficient sleep remains elusive for many. The cultural glorification of exhaustion continues. There's a widespread narrative that successful people don't sleep much. They work hard, stay up late, get up early. They push through tiredness. This narrative persists even as scientific evidence accumulates, showing that good sleep is essential for health, happiness, and success. In the 2020s, the COVID-19 pandemic creates a unique situation. Lockdowns and working from home change sleep patterns for some people. Without commutes, some people can sleep longer. But for others, the stress and anxiety of the pandemic disrupts sleep severely. There's a spike in insomnia and sleep problems during this period. Remote work, which becomes common during and after the pandemic, creates a blurring of boundaries. Your bedroom might also be your office. The space of rest and the space of work are the same. This makes it harder to disconnect from work, to shift into a mental state conducive to sleep. As we reach the mid-2020s, we see an increasing split in how people experience sleep. Those with resources, time, money, good health, can create good sleep conditions and get decent sleep. They have flexible schedules. They have comfortable bedrooms. They might have access to health care if they have sleep problems. But for many others, sleep remains inadequate. Long work hours, multiple jobs, stress, noisy living conditions, poor housing, all of these interfere with sleep. There's also increasing anxiety about sleep itself. People worry about whether they're sleeping enough. They wonder if their sleep quality is good. They try different solutions. There's a kind of meta-anxiety, anxiety about sleep. Yet there's also, in the 2020s, a growing counterculture focused on rest and recovery. Some people are pushing back against the glorification of exhaustion. There's more talk about the importance of sleep, about the need for rest, about slowing down. Some people are choosing to limit their technology use in bedrooms. Some are seeking more balance in their lives. So as we look at sleep in the early 2020s, we see a complex picture. Incredible technology and knowledge about sleep, yet widespread sleep deprivation. Comfortable sleeping environments for many, yet anxiety about sleep remains high. Better understanding of sleep's importance, yet the modern world seems increasingly incompatible with good sleep. And then we must consider, what will the future bring? As technology continues to advance, will we find ways to sleep better? Or will we continue on this trajectory of decreased sleep and increased sleep-related anxiety? We have now traveled through thousands of years of human sleep. We've seen sleep in ancient Egypt and Rome. We've experienced the medieval night with its spiritual fears and protective rituals. We've witnessed the transformation brought by artificial lighting and industrialization. We've observed the modern obsession with optimization and the anxiety that accompanies it. What can we take from this journey? What does the history of sleep teach us? First, perhaps, is that sleep has always been important. Humans have always known that sleep is necessary. But the way we understand sleep, the way we value it, the way we protect it or sacrifice it has changed dramatically. Second, our modern struggles with sleep are not entirely individual failures. They're not simply about your personal sleep habits or your individual choices. They're part of larger historical and cultural currents. The modern world is genuinely hostile to good sleep in many ways. The constant light, the constant stimulation, the constant demands on our attention, these are not conducive to rest. Third, there was a time when sleep was different. It was fragmented, yes, but it was also accepted as natural. People were not anxious about their sleep patterns because fragmented sleep was the norm. There was no sense that they were failing at sleep. Now we're told that 8 continuous hours is the ideal, and anything less is a problem. But we live in a world that makes those 8 continuous hours increasingly difficult to achieve. Fourth, different times and places have found different solutions to the challenge of sleeping well. Medieval people protected their sleep with spiritual practices. Victorian people created elaborate bedrooms. Modern people invest in technology and products. None of these solutions is foolproof. Sleep remains a challenge. And finally, perhaps most importantly, sleep is deeply human. It's universal. Every human being sleeps, and in the specifics of how we sleep, what we wear, where we sleep, who we sleep near, what we believe about sleep, how we prepare for sleep, we see the values and conditions of our particular time and place. As we lie down to sleep tonight, we're not just resting our bodies. We're participating in a practice that humans have engaged in since the beginning of time. Our sleep connects us to countless generations before us, and it connects us to countless generations yet to come. The history of sleep is, in many ways, the history of humanity. It's the story of how we've tried to protect ourselves from the darkness, how we've found comfort and community, how we've struggled with the demands of our world. It's intimate and universal, personal and historical, simple and profound. Sleep well, rest deeply, and know that in your sleep, you're part of an ancient and continuing human story.